This presentation is a specially tailored compilation of previously published and also never published material dedicated to the famous painting Venus of Urbino by Titian. The painting is currently showcased in Uffizi in Florence and dated to the year 1538. As a forewarning, Venus of Urbino is probably the most misunderstood pre-modern painting in the history of fine art, rivaled only by Arnolfini portrait. Venus of Urbino is not the painting that yields to casual observation or educated guess. One needs to know a lot to understand this painting and appreciate its significance, and, unfortunately, the relevant knowledge was deliberately obfuscated and even destroyed for centuries on end. Following are a couple of examples of prominent people trying to express their feelings about this painting. The first one is the famous American writer, Mark Twain. Here is what Mark Twain wrote about the Venus of Urbino, in his book, A Tramp Abroad, published in 1880. The book was a mix of fiction and practical travel guide. At the door of the Uffizi, in Florence, one is confronted by statues of a man and a woman, noseless, battered, black with accumulated grime. They hardly suggest human beings, yet these ridiculous creatures have been thoughtfully and conscientiously fig-leaved by this fastidious generation. You enter, and proceed to that most visited little gallery that exists in the world, the tribune, and there, against the wall, without obstructing rag or leaf, you may look your fill upon the foulest, the vilest, the obscenest picture the world possesses, Titian's Venus. It isn't that she is naked and stretched out on a bed, no, it is the attitude of one of her arms and hand. If I ventured to describe that attitude, there would be a fine hull, but there the Venus lies, for anybody to gloat over that wants to, and there she has a right to lie, for she is a work of art, and art has its privileges. I saw young girls stealing furtive glances at her, I saw young men gaze long and absorbedly at her, I saw aged, infirm men hang upon her charms with a pathetic interest. How I should like to describe her, just to see what a holy indignation I could stir up in the world, just to hear the unreflecting average man deliver himself about my grossness and coarseness, and all that. The world says that no worded description of a moving spectacle is 1/100th part as moving as the same spectacle seen with one's own eyes, yet the world is willing to let its son and its daughter and itself look at Titian's beast, but won't stand a description of it in words. Which shows that the world is not as consistent as it might be. There are pictures of nude women which suggest no impure thought. I am well aware of that. I am not railing at such. What I am trying to emphasize is the fact that Titian's Venus is very far from being one of that sort. Without any question it was painted for a bagnio, and it was probably refused because it was a trifle too strong. In truth, it is too strong for any place but a public art gallery. Titian has two Venuses in the tribune. Persons who have seen them will easily remember which one I am referring to. What is interesting about the writings of Mark Twain is that it was published in 1880, and while Mark Twain lived for another 30 years, there is no record of any lifetime objection or polemic about the painting, and there is nothing surfaced for the century that followed. Mark Twain missed the mark on this painting big time, and if he was alive, he would probably write an apology. But he was not the only one who was fooled by this painting. On this slide is a painting by Ernst Klimt, brother of Gustav Klimt, that depicts an aged Titian in the company of a young woman looking very much like Venus of Urbino. According to the description, it is supposed to be a Titian's daughter named Lavinia. Titian did have a daughter named Lavinia, and her likeness is known. She has nothing in common with the woman in this painting. The woman most obviously wearing see-through nightie, and Titian's posture around her is anything but fatherly. It would be a total scandal if Titian would ask his adult daughter to model for his painting in the nude. It looks very much like Ernst Klimt wanted to imply that Titian kept a much younger mistress and used her as the model for the Venus of Urbino. Titian was a fancy fellow, just look at his signature gold chains, but he was also a reasonable man. Titian was a painter and entrepreneur, and he had to maintain appearances, reputation, and respectability. I honestly do not know if Titian kept any mistresses, but he is unlikely to showcase that in such an explicit way. Just like Mark Twain, his contemporary Ernst Klimt was completely wrong about the Venus painting. It needs to be said that the painting could be an intentional joke, but the only takeaway of the painting by Ernst Klimt is that Venus of Urbino was a real person, and painter Titian knew and met that woman. While that part is true, getting ahead of the story, I have to disclose that in my humble opinion, never in the million years Titian could get a girlfriend like that. To get to the bottom of the story about the Venus of Urbino, we have to get back to the roots, the time of my personal favorite, the 15th century, the last quarter of it. Once upon this time period there was an important and powerful man. He had a romantic relationship, and his mistress became pregnant with his child. They never married, but the idea of having a child was very appealing to that man. He carefully selected the name, he designed a plan about upbringing and educating his child. He probably even cared to choose a career path for his child. The day came and his mistress gave birth. The great day for the father was a major disappointment. His much-expected son was born a daughter. It was a girl. But the man in this story would not give up on his dreams that easily. Wrong gender of his child was really just a minor setback. As a result, his girl ventured in the world with a man's name, was forced to do sports, wear men's clothing and got education that was customary for a young man of her standing. We do not know how far the charade would be going, but we have the evidence, and it will be provided a little later. To create an impression that he had a son, the man in question reached out to the famous fashionable painter at the time. When the painter figured out what was required of him, he was taken aback. It was beneath him to paint a child in the way that continued a charade. But he could not say no, and he delegated to his very young apprentice, who happened to be somewhat of a girly man in his tender age of 12 or so. The young apprentice appealed to the young lady of the same age, and one thing led to another. Their story would eventually become a legend, and about 4 centuries later, in 1891, William Adolphe Bouguereau would render young lovers in his adorable painting, Her First Jewels. I very much love to keep the mystery of identity as a tool of engaging the audience, but unfortunately it is not possible for much longer. It is not recorded in the written history, but as depicted by Pietro Perugino, Raphael, aged about 15, proposed to Felice della Rovere of about the same age. She apparently said yes, and added that her father will never allow that to happen. Presented as Annunciation of Fano and dated as 1488. It is probably a retrospection, as it was only later that Pietro Perugino realized that a milestone in the history of humankind is taking place in front of his own eyes. Raphael was born in 1483 and Felice was born between 1480 and 1483. At the top of the proposal is Cardinal Rovere, future Pope Julius II, surrounded by his demons. Putty with wings other than white is most likely meant to be a demon by the painter. Curiously, the hand of Felice and the hand of her father are exactly the same, to underscore their family connection. A girly man, Raphael Sanzio, became a member of the papal household. As for William Adolphe Bouguereau, he did not paint his painting guided by his imagination about the young lovers. He used a fresco of Adam and Eve by Raphael, with Raphael and Felice standing in for the biblical couple. Felice is a mirror image, and small details are meticulously transferred: left foot of Raphael, palm of Felice. Raphael painted this fresco as a retrospection, but it was his memory of young Felice, fit, almost athletic and very confident. The depiction as Adam and Eve carry yet another symbolic meaning, as Adam and Eve started humanity, and Raphael and Felice also started some very important things that will be discussed a little later. In the meantime, as young lovers made their intention known, the scandal became of a humongous proportion. Pietro Perugino, Ascension of Christ, from 1495 until 1498, Museum of Fine Arts of Lyon. Real title is, Raphael proclaiming his love for Felice while Cardinal Rovere asking Felice's mom, Lucrezia Normani, to help break up the relationship between Raphael and Felice. Most remarkable is a lifelike depiction of Lucrezia Normani, Cardinal Rovere's former mistress, at the time married to someone else. Lucrezia is depicted angrily and disapprovingly looking at Raphael, as a Christ, surrounded by 6 angels with the face of Felice. Felice herself is right under ecstatic Raphael in love. Cardinal Rovere, future Pope Julius II, looking at his ex-girlfriend and mother of his only daughter with desperate hope. Mésalliance between Felice and Raphael interferes with his plans to become a pope. Saint Peter is also there as an allusion to aspirations of the cardinal. It is all in vain, and this romance will last a lifetime. Raphael is showing a finger, digitus imputicus in Latin, to Lucrezia while looking at her, and 2 fingers to Saint Peter. He and Felice would not give a damn to the familial and political considerations and intend to remain together. The facial hair of Raphael is anachronistic, and it is only depicted to make him look like Jesus. Pinturicchio, Bernardino di Beto. And workshop, Assumption of the Virgin. It was commissioned by the wealthy merchant and banker Paolo Tolosa for the altar of his chapel in the Neapolitan church of Monte Oliveto, in the first decade of the 16th century. This painting is really Felice proclaiming her love for Raphael. Raphael is captive of Cardinal Rovere, with the sword, known as warring Pope later, and Saint Peter, apparently dignified. It is a hilarious reiteration of the Raphael/Felice by Pietro Perugino, Ascension of Christ. Saint Peter and Pope Julius II are temporarily triumphant over the love of Raphael and Felice. History would prove both of them wrong. In the meantime, the scandal reached the next level. Audi altarpiece, by Raphael showing him holding Felice's chastity belt. By the way, for those who care, it is just a belt. Cardinal Rovere is angrily looking at very pregnant Felice in her state of pretend innocence and pointing at Raphael with his right hand as if asking for confirmation if he is the father of the child. Obviously, this is a rhetorical question. But the most interesting is the presence of angry and upset Saint Peter. Saint Peter is an allusion to papacy and, obviously, the untimely pregnancy of Felice is an additional obstacle for Cardinal Rovere on the way to the coveted position of Pope. Felice was an illegitimate daughter that came from the modest upbringing, and her marriage to Raphael was something that could happen. But for Cardinal Rovere to become Pope Julius II, the mésalliance was unacceptable, and marriage between young lovers never became a reality. There is obviously a disadvantage of being a daughter of an ambitious and ruthless cardinal father. In spite of that, flowers of the new life grow out of old Roman sarcophagus. Felice and Raphael repeated 3 times in heaven. True to the fact, there is no facial hair on the face of Raphael, they are still teenagers. At the proper time Felice gave birth to a child. On this slide there are 3 depictions of her and her firstborn. The image created by Raphael, the original one, will go on to become one of the most influential images in the history of art. Unwed teenage mother depicted by the father of her child. Felice by Raphael, for eternity. Felice della Rovere, Raphael's girlfriend and baby mama. Raphael is a swan, she is real royalty, and he is only a prince of painters. But this is only part of Felice's astonishing pictorial. I intentionally included the portrait that is now attributed to Pietro Perugino. I am not a specialist in attribution, but all paintings of Felice by Raphael are made with expression of love. The portrait attributed to Perugino shares that generalization, and Perugino was not who was in love with Felice. Those 2 paintings of Felice on the left are very early and tell a lot about her. She loved to play dress-up and dressed as a cardinal in the first one. This painting is in the Museum of Fine Arts in Budapest, Hungary, and is known as a portrait of a young man. It would not be the last time Felice was painted as a man, and she is known from history to sign her letters as Felix, as if she was a man. Felice knew well that her gender made her aspiration to follow her father to that position of importance absolutely impossible. But in the scheme of things, elevating Felice to the rank of cardinal would be a price Christianity would have been well advised to pay in order to keep her silent. On the painting below Felice is an angel. It may not be very original, but it is probably the very first one documenting the developing feelings of Raphael. The painting is in Pinacoteca Civico Tozio Martinengo, Brescia, Italy. Very early in the history of this relationship, Raphael expressed his opinion of it being heavenly or divine. On the right is Raphael, styled in the way of works by his teacher Pietro Perugino, and allegedly representing Saint Sebastian. Well, from what is discovered, it is not Saint Sebastian, it is Raphael himself, hit by one of the arrows of Cupid. The painting is in Accademia Carrara di Belle Arti di Bergamo, Italy. Melancholic expression on the face of the Saint Sebastian is an additional clue about his feelings and the complexity of the situation. And the situation was about to become much more complex. Because this presentation is about Venus of Urbino, one more painting needs to be presented. It is known as yet another man's portrait, but the mystery is no more. At this point we know just about enough to retrace Titian's creative process in Venus of Urbino. No, she was not Titian's girlfriend. Making of the Venus of Urbino. Raphael plus Raphael equal Titian, Venus of Urbino. The choice of Titian was not exactly free. The image of teenage Felice was already making rounds in the world of art. In my opinion, Felice was nicknamed Madonna for two reasons. One is the number of paintings where she is depicted as Madonna, Mary, mother of Jesus, and because she gave birth to a child without being known to date anyone. Titian's own Flora in Uffizi is just another rendering of Felice. As a choice of body for Venus of Urbino, it was an unbeatable choice. The woman in the peak fertility and youth, woman that proven her ability to bear the child and willing to do it again. Real Felice gave birth 6 times that I know about. Giving his Venus of Urbino a face of a more sophisticated, even intimidating woman, Titian achieved an impact that startled many, including Mark Twain. On another note, the spark, the love that is in depictions by Raphael is gone. Venus has a cold steely stare, and that was precisely what Titian wanted to convey. It is no longer an intimate portrait, it is a challenge to the world. Identifying Venus of Urbino as Felice makes it necessary to bring up the book, The Pope's Daughter, by Caroline Murphy that was published about 20 years ago. The book is very useful, also attempting to portray Felice as a modern woman of sorts is misguided. Felice is a figure in the scheme of religion and a force of nature to reckon with. The book is missing about 80% of the good stuff about Felice. On the positive note, the book identifies the portrait by the hand of Sebastiano del Piombo, Michelangelo's follower, as a verified depiction of her. It is very useful because at the moment there is a push in certain circles to withdraw this identification. On the other hand, this book identifies a portrait by Del Piombo as the only depiction of Felice. In my opinion, Felice is a serious contender to be a person with the most depictions in history of humanity among those whose likeness is known. In short, we need a better book. The painting by Del Piombo, just as a drawing by Raphael and Venus by Titian, are often used as prototypes in many paintings of Felice, and some of those carry very special significance. Titian was aware of the painting by Del Piombo and interplayed it in his Venus with the Mirror. Here are a few examples of Titian himself doing rinse and repeat with the image of Venus of Urbino. The Girl with the Fur is important because it is a connection to the images of Felice by Peter Paul Rubens. The Girl with the Fur is important because it is a connection to the images of Felice by Peter Paul Rubens. Rubens was a great admirer of Felice, also just like anyone who knows her whole story, he experienced very mixed feelings about her. Rubens is also a creator of the humorous, Felician Trinity, also loosely based on Titian's Venus of Urbino. Here the Venus of Urbino is reiterated as Dressadal by Artemisia Gentileschi. Fetched $2,600,000 at auction in 2022. And here is one more, now by Rembrandt. I think Rembrandt suspected Felice dabbling in witchcraft. She would be right at home at Hogwarts. The influence of the Venus of Urbino is much more subtle in the depiction of Felice from our own 21st century. Somber, Winged Scholar, by Betty Jiang is modeled after Venus. The meaning of the painting is beyond the scope of this presentation, and now I am actually violating copyright. I hope Betty will forgive me if she finds out. Back to Felice and Raphael love affair. It looks like Cardinal Rovere eventually accepted the choice of Felice. Here is Raphael, Felice, their child, and Cardinal Rovere together. Just like in the Audi altarpiece, Felice is shown taller than her father and Raphael. She was probably 5 foot 9 inch, 5 feet 10 inches tall, rarity even in our days. This temporary calm was soon interrupted by tragedy. There is no historical trace or the first child of Felice and Raphael in existence, and most likely the child died in infancy. Faust at the Sabbath trying to capture the moment, replicating Raphael's fresco, Adam and Eve, at the same time. Depicting Raphael as the young man is incorrect. Raphael depicted himself as a teenager with no sign of facial hair. Death of the child throws everything in disarray. Felice's parents seized the moment and sprang into action. Here the somber scene, Raphael, Felice and Cardinal Rovere, investments, putting the child to rest. Everybody is very sad. Now that the child is no longer in the picture, parents of Felice redoubled their effort to separate Felice and Raphael. This painting is a sarcastic reminder of those unhappy times. Raphael with Cardinal Rovere and Lucrezia Normani after they wrestled Felice from him. If someone manages to forget at this point, this presentation is about Venus of Urbino. In his painting, Titian captured that difficult time in the life of Felice. Two female figures are not the servants looking for clothing. The one that is kneeling is the young Felice crying at the coffin of her baby. It is not the chest with clothing in front of her. Pope Julius II was determined to make a respectable woman out of his daughter, and after she rejected 2 proposed candidates, he insisted that she marry Gian Giordano Orsini. It looks like Gian Giordano Orsini married her for the dowry money. Felice's reputation was damaged, and that affected possible marriage prospects. Gian Giordano Orsini was a gambler, and he was destitute, as far as that applicable to nobility. That is why he is depicted barefoot. He occupied the well-paid position of condottiero, manager of Italian mercenary troops, at the court of the King of France. He was also the king's personal friend and gambling partner. Gian Giordano Orsini was important to Pope Julius II as he provided direct access to the King of France. Felice did break up with Raphael as ordered by her father, but it was easily foreseeable that arranged marriage will not work for the woman that she was. In the Engagement of the Virgin Mary, by Raphael, now in Pinacoteca Brera, Milan, Italy, Felice looks broken and downhearted. In this curious painting, Raphael is shown as a third wheel in the marriage of Felice. Humorously, he depicted himself as Saint Cecilia, wearing a dress. The loveless marriage of Felice was heading for inevitable disaster. Felice gave birth to 4 children fathered by her husband. 2 sons and a daughter would live to adulthood. Felice and her husband lived separate lives as she remained in Italy and manipulated her father into giving her a position that would allow her to become the richest woman in the country for several years in a row. Her husband spent most of his time in France, and he kept mistresses there. Felice accepted her stepdaughter from the first marriage of her husband, but was on uneasy terms with her stepson Napoleon Orsini, who wanted a bigger piece of pie from the land holdings of his father that were now in the hands of Felice. This painting took me long enough to figure it out. It is Felice della Rovere losing her 5th child, the angel of death, with black wings, is shown taking the child from her. Waiting behind her is her firstborn, by Raphael, getting to meet his half-brother, by Gian Giordano Orsini. Children look remarkably different to underscore that they have different fathers. Kneeling child looks the same as in the earlier depictions to signify illusion and connection. Felice is somber and contemplating. The loss of a child caused Felice to make a decision to abandon her husband and reunite with Raphael. Her child number 6, now by Raphael, Girolamo Orsini, lived into adulthood with recorded male lineage that lasted about 200 years. After that lineage became female. That said, all children of Felice were on the wild side and illegitimate offsprings are possible. As the side note, depicting Felice in religious paintings was not an act of hooliganism. On the scale of humanity, Felice is a figure of religion that is equal to Jesus or Muhammad, the figures that she effectively dethroned and replaced with herself. Here the interpretation of Felice breaking up with her husband by Peter Paul Rubens. There are traceable facial similarities in this painting. Rubens worked a century after the events in question and he had a particular vision of Felice. On the level of speculation, it is possible that Felice used money that she had to keep her husband out of her life. As customary at the time, divorce was nearly impossible. Case in point, her contemporary English King Henry VIII. Apparently, there is a lot more going on in this painting and hopefully someone would find time to untangle it. Here is a more humorous depiction of Felice dumping her husband. Apparently, the fact was well known among the artists. Notable are earrings of Felice similar to Venus of Urbino. Raphael, Swan, coming back to Felice, now married mother of 3. His advances are welcomed. Her last child would be by him. Here the Felice with baby Girolamo Orsini, as painted by William Adolphe Bouguereau. Obviously a reconstructive and humorous example of doing mini-me long before Austin Powers. In the corner Felice with Girolamo by Michelangelo for reference, from the tomb of Pope Julius II, the grandfather. If someone manages to forget at this point, this presentation is yet again about Venus of Urbino. In his painting, Titian borrowed some elements from the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci and used drapes/panels to indicate children of Felice that live to adulthood. There are 13 people in the Last Supper, 2 women and 11 men. There are no rectangular shapes for women, but there are 11 rectangular shapes for men, 3 windows and 8 drapes/panels. Windows stand for Jesus, Peter and Judas that are under their own names. All others stand for something or somebody else, they are hidden, draped over. 2 shapes closest to the viewer are somewhat bigger to underscore the importance of figures in front of them. As for Titian, he painted 3 shapes somewhat wider as Felice had 3 sons and one is half as wide for a daughter. Felice had a number of grandchildren. There was one more complication in the life of Felice. While she was attempting to make her unfortunate marriage work, Raphael got himself another girlfriend known as Margherita Ludi. Raphael and Margherita Ludi had a beautiful baby girl, Hortensia Sanzio Ludi, who grew up, married and continued yet another female lineage of Raphael. This cluttered slide shows how William Adolphe Bouguereau helps to identify baby pictures of the daughter of Raphael and Margherita. Hortensia de Bardi di Montalto, additional research is needed. In 1518 Raphael painted 2 variants of the painting, Saint Margaret and the Dragon. Dragon is about to swallow Saint Margaret. Raphael depicted himself as a dragon. As for Saint Margaret, it was Felice and Margherita Ludi, love interests of Raphael. There was a love triangle that existed for years, at least from 1513, and Raphael either had a hardest time choosing or hoped to swallow them both. Characteristically, Felice is shown standing on the firm ground. She had her own money, but Margherita Ludi is shown standing on the wing of the dragon, probably to allude that she was supported by Raphael. Both paintings are the finest examples of the early erotica, and two-piece nightie of Felice really stands out. Stance of Felice might be an allusion to the possibility that Felice was argumentative and/or physically abusive with Raphael. Felice della Rovere, on the left, posed for Sebastiano del Piombo in nearly exact pose as La Fornerina. Margherita Ludi posed for Raphael a couple years prior. By this painting Felice signaled that she was real true love of Raphael, or that she thought so, and that the painting is made in memoriam of him. The green curtain is a signal the painting is about someone's death. There is similar finger positioning in both paintings, the love language signals that are now lost. But the most stunning is the red dress of Felice. Red color in the paintings made in memoriam is an allusion that the person in question was murdered. It could be that Felice, belatedly and regretfully, pointed at herself as the reason for the death of Raphael, the love of her life. Abduction of Ganymede, circa 1611-12 by Peter Paul Rubens. Death, assassination by arsenic poisoning, of Raphael, who is shown taken from his two girlfriends at the time, Margherita Ludi and Felice della Rovere. In the meantime, there was one more mysterious misadventure in the life of Felice. Her estranged husband suddenly decided to stage a comeback and possibly tried to use violence while doing so. As a result, he ended up dead. Felice got the blame for his death and the death of her stepson Napoleon. She was never formally charged but paid huge bribes to make charges to go away. Among the people she had to bribe were the sitting Pope and reigning French king. In spite of suave depictions related to the event, Felice was not likely the one who used force. Felice got her first set of bodyguards at the age of 12. At the event in question, she was probably guarded by the grandchildren of the first pair. When they saw Mama in danger, they jumped in. By the time Felice regained consciousness and control, it was too late to call the ambulance. People connected to households knew that their own well-being and well-being of their extended families are dependent on survival and goodwill of the patron. Legend has it, Felice was a very involved patron who cared about her people a great deal. Apparently, when her life was in danger, that generosity was rewarded. Two pelts on her shoulder are bear skins. Her husband's and stepson's last names were Orsini. There is a word play with Latin ursinus that means bear. Felice told her husband and stepson to get out and stay out, and for a woman to come out alive from the deadly domestic violence was a very unusual fit. It is suspected that Felice forged or altered her husband's will to her liking by pretending that her husband is still alive while fallen ill, so her hand-picked notary got the time to handle the paperwork. Most obviously, Titian reflected on that juicy story about Felice in his Venus of Urbino. Titian also showed Felice rolling up her sleeves as if preparing to deliver the blow. Philippe Jacques Van Brie, Study of Women Painters. It is not a study of women painters. It is a lesson to women. It is Felice della Rovere on the podium, with the skin of the bear. She, or her bodyguards, killed her husband Orsini. Orsini is a wordplay with ursinus, bear. She is shown with the bear pelt and a bracelet, just like in the Venus of Urbino. Apparently, legend about her way of resolving family problems survived for centuries and did not particularly draw a moral reprimand it would have caused in the modern days. It is natural that through the centuries artists had very mixed feelings about Felice. Here the Felice with dying or dead Raphael, who was in agony for several days because of a marginal dose of the arsenic. And this the same Felice by the very same painter William Adolphe Bouguereau. If anyone wonders what the other side of Venus of Urbino looks like, here it is. All of the above could have created an impression that Felice della Rovere was just another notorious historical personage positioned somewhere between Zeus and Lucrezia Borgia. This impression is misleading, and Felice's fame has very little to do with most of the adventures of her personal life. Also, being Raphael's girlfriend and baby mama was a remarkable fit. I have mentioned before that Felice received a serious education to make her fit for high office in the church hierarchy. Also, she could not get appointed to the aforementioned office unless she would be willing to conceal her gender. It might look like personal life totally consumed Felice's time and attention. Reality was much more complicated. It is her scientific achievements as Latin scholar, researcher, and contributor, along with her outspoken position as a serious opponent of Christianity, is what made Felice into one of the most important humans who ever lived. It is apparent that Dominic Zampieri used de-aging artistic technique to recreate the likeness of young Felice. Painting a real young Felice from Raphael or Perugino would be a serious danger to his life. At the age about 15, Felice figured that Christianity is a pack of lies and there probably is no God. There are reasons to suspect that she was an adherent or founder of deism, essentially atheism but with God in the beginning. Felice was a 1 in 50 million child prodigy who was able to work with documents written 1,000 years before she was born. It is obvious that von Amerling was building on the work of Dominic Zampieri. The golden pages of the book are turning bloody red. The steely resolve of Venus in the eyes of a younger teen I would probably consider an overkill. Young Felice is still under the veil of darkness, but she is not lost in dreams. The title of the painting is ironic. In this painting, a very young Felice is shown reading secret documents from papal archives, from the side of St. Peter. Young Raphael is already present in the life of Felice, but he is still calm, he does not know what awaits him. Jesus and Felice have the most distinctive halos in this painting. In the scheme of humanity they are equals. From what can be deduced from available sources, Felice recovered 3 important documents: Gospel of Thomas, in Latin, secret letter or report of Saint Jerome, and primer on Mary Magdalene and Paul. Saint Peter is shown stepping on Felice's foot, impeding her research. While doing scientific research, it is very important for a young researcher to find a good research supervisor. One of the messages of this painting is the key to the epic School of Athens, is that Felice found the best one available. She is shown under none other than Leonardo da Vinci. Curiously, Leonardo da Vinci is shown riding a dark horse. In the paintings of the time, White Horse was standing for the Old Testament, and Dark Horse is standing for the New Testament. Leonardo conducted 3-year-long research of the New Testament, but his conclusions were unusual and startling. Leonardo was hesitant to put his conclusions in circulation. Not only could his conclusions have been wrong, he could have put his life in danger for the sake of exotic but incorrect research results that he had. Curiously, I can second his concerns. No, my life was not in danger, but I could only think about the results of my research as an interesting theory. In not so many words, groundbreaking research could seriously benefit from outside confirmation. Coincidentally, the conclusions of Leonardo da Vinci were confirmation for my research, but Leonardo was in a much less confident situation with far fewer options. That was a state of affairs until he met Felice. Documents that she found in the papal archives provided crucial proof that his conclusions are sound. The charade of Christianity that lasted over 1,400 years came to an end. In his Last Supper, Leonardo incorporated knowledge contained in the Gospel of Thomas and primer on Mary Magdalene and Paul. The new knowledge from the Report of Saint Jerome incorporated in Leonardo's painting with the same name. It is suspected that Felice named her youngest son Girolamo in honor of her research of Saint Jerome. Unfortunately, considerations mentioned above, while available, are beyond the scope of this presentation. In her own turn, Felice embarked on an epic demonstration of her findings about Christianity that is now known as Fresco, School of Athens. But before the School of Athens became a reality, the event described in the next slide upended equilibrium big time. It was suspected for some time that the end of Christianity as a religion came when Felice della Rovere, a woman devoted to intellectual resistance, shared newly systematized knowledge with her father, Pope Julius II. This theory was bound to remain a speculation if not for the surprising report of the contemporary. An enigmatic painting by Andrea Mantegna is a snapshot of historical exchange. Her bravery was for ages as she did not know if she would come out alive. Christianity became a conspiracy, and humanity entered the age of Felice. Felice della Rovere was also a great destroyer. She is looking great for any 130-year-old. She confronted the church and blew the cover of the intellectual resistance. What she did needed to be done, but it cost many lives of artists who worked for the resistance. Raphael and Caravaggio died in 1610, right before this painting was made, most likely among them. Similar posture of the female figure to Raphael's sketch is a leading hint to this identification. The seashells by her feet are probably standing for the destroyed scrolls. She is standing on one. Among the artists close to Leonardo Salai would pay the ultimate price. They made it look like a duel on crossbows. Caravaggio was tough and a duel would not work on him. Arsenic did, just like on Raphael. A tell-all fresco about the beginnings of Christianity, the School of Athens, was decoded and now on TikTok. It is a most visible creative collaboration of Felice and Raphael. In Venus of Urbino, there is a half of the unique window from the fresco, signifying equal contribution of Felice. The window itself is borrowed from the Last Supper, and columns supposed to underscore connection between Last Supper and Mona Lisa by Leonardo, as she is flanked by columns. Unfortunately, the connection can no longer be affirmed as the background in the window behind Jesus on the Last Supper is obliterated and the health history of Mona Lisa is missing. It is suspected that on the fresco Felice is pregnant with Girolamo. Gustave Moreau, painting centuries later, saw the contributions of Felice and Raphael different from Titian. The apparition of Felice della Rovere shows Felice beheading John the Baptist, symbol of his sect that evolved into Christianity. The motif, in turn, is centuries old, with Guido Reni producing the best example of the painting based on this idea. According to Gustave Moreau, Felice is crowned and in command, and Raphael is just her executioner. She really did not know how to paint. It is not an obvious conclusion, but Venus of Urbino is actually in memoriam painting of Felice della Rovere. Titian painted it barely 2 years after her death. Little, anthropomorphic, looking like Felice, dog is asleep. Dog is a symbol of devotion to Raphael. A dog sleeping means a devoted person is dead. Green drape means the grassy surface of the graveyard is covering the depicted person. The red fabric of the sofa and roses turning red by the blood of Venus are the sign that Felice herself was assassinated, just like Raphael. Titian is subtle about that, and he had ample and obvious reasons to be subtle. Even before assassination of Raphael in 1520, Felice made an effort to spread her ideas. After the death of her father, Pope Julius II, she was no longer protected by the authority of his office. It is suspected that she played a role in the relocation of Leonardo da Vinci to France and his introduction to the French court. Positive reaction of the king on the findings of Leonardo inspired her to continue her work and spread the word in a much more dangerous environment. The assassination of Raphael in 1520 was an act that sent ripples through the intellectual world. The moral pivot that rested on the crucifixion of Jesus was now moved to the martyrdom for the truth by Raphael. Aggrieved, Felice embarked on a stealthy but steady fight with the goal to make the truth to muscle out Christianity from the intellectual discourse, politics and governance. Felice worked to turn artists and kings into adherents of her teachings. Shown here is the young Titian, as organist with the same gold chains as old Titian, settling to a lifetime praise of Felice. Multi-talented Giorgio Vasari painted himself as one of the children of Felice, and at the same time as a craftsman who makes her armor. King Francis, persuaded by Leonardo, formally folded to the teachings of Felice in 1517, and the French government followed after the death of Leonardo in 1519. All those portraits of Felice displayed in the houses and palaces throughout Europe were meant to signal visitors that this house is with Felice, not with the church, and they can speak without looking across the shoulder. Religion of Islam is rarely viewed as the sect or offshoot of Christianity, but the head of the Muslim world, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, knew very well what was the religion that he was leading at the time. No, there is no written evidence. Titian painted his portrait, and making a portrait takes a long time. They had time to talk. Reform of the law, including law related to the office and person of the Sultan, followed, and for the first time in centuries sitting Sultan got married. But the painting below is not a painting of his wife. Titian introduced Suleiman to the truth and facts about religion, and that was at least as important as his marriage that followed. Findings of Felice crossed the East-West divide, and Islam ended in mid-1500s. Given all things, Felice is more important than the legendary Roxolana. Dutch artist Hendrik Goltzius is much more upfront about assassination of Felice. His painting is practically a police diagram about the crime. 4 angels are probably allusions to the 4 children of Felice. I have to add from myself that I do not consider Felice a martyr. She died fighting for what she believed in, and she did not die in vain. As for the crimes of the Church, they will not be forgotten or forgiven. For the record, Felice could not be confronted by Inquisition. Inquisition is a court, and truth cannot be confronted in court. If you do, you will lose. If you win, it could be even worse than losing. Death of Felice did not stop the spread of her ideas. Very young Peter Paul Rubens painted himself keeping score with Murderous Eagle, on the right. It is most obvious that The Judgment of Paris is not about ancient Troy and Helen as mentioned in Homer's Iliad. It is the city of Paris choosing Felice, about a century after her death, as a wise guidance. Characteristically, she is no longer grabbing the swan, she has a book in her hand. The dog on the forefront is probably a symbol of devotion to Felice. Raphael and Margherita Ludi, from fresco with Mercury and Psyche, are also there, but Paris has no interest in them, his stare is at Felice. Centuries later, people who were in possession of the knowledge, the teachings of Felice, fell from the height of power, and the new people came to replace them. Paris on this painting is shown wearing the cap commonly associated with revolutionary France. Angelica Kauffmann herself as Venus introducing Helen to the new, revolutionary Paris. The Helen, however, deserves a closer look. Apparently, Angelica Kauffmann used Helen/Felice from the painting by Peter Paul Rubens from over a century before her time. To eliminate doubts, she also borrowed the right arm of her, Helen, from the Venus of Urbino by Titian. Is Bellona by Rembrandt, Felice? Previous painting by Angelica Kauffmann presented a problem with some of the depictions of Felice. Some of them are suspected to be her, but not that easy to identify with certainty. Just like the painting of Bellona on this slide. Yes, there is some facial likeness. Yes, there is a Medusa, a self-portrait by Caravaggio used as the shield. Caravaggio lived, painted and died for the resistance, for the ideas of Felice. But in my opinion, paintings like this would benefit from computer-aided identification, also this one I consider to be on the easy side. Computers could be very helpful to see if Francisco Goya was yet another adherent of Felice. The Dressadal in his two paintings is a hint that he probably was. On the difficult side is this example. It would be hilarious if Felice crossed the Atlantic Ocean to give Mark Twain a piece of her mind to make him retract his badmouthing of her image in the Venus of Urbino. For the record, Lady Liberty was supposed to be modeled after the mother of the sculptor, Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, 1834–1904. Bartholdi lived and worked in France and USA, and in 19th century the French government opened intelligence archives to a few select artists like William Adolphe Bouguereau, 1825–1905. Bouguereau's art was not a result of his own research. On another hand, Bartholdi could have considered Felice his second mother, just like Giorgio Vasari. In spite of all his fame, Bartholdi is an enigma as an artist. The paintings dedicated to Felice della Rovere are exceedingly rare in 20th and 21st centuries. I personally think she deserves to be remembered. She gave it all and helped to bring us a gift of modernity that we all can enjoy. Here is a rare example of the artwork by a famous artist designed to commemorate 500th birthday of Felice. Even in 20th century artists preferred to remain cryptic when it comes to Felice and her ideas. Even this one is obviously missing an image of the birthday girl. Painting made in the time of video games and nuclear weapons, and incorporating those visuals, still shows that the painter is wary of judgment. Felice explodes Moses. Salvador Dali knew what Michelangelo wanted to express. Moses looked at her with horror for about 440 years. In 1982, on the occasion of her 500th birthday, she turned to him. Game over, Felice is forever. As an alternative ending, I have decided to include this emotional painting. A very young Peter Paul Rubens with 1970th hairstyle taking a lesson from Madonna, Felice. What he learned from her teachings empowered him for the rest of his life. And, as Michelangelo once remarked, it shows. Oh, by the way, a holy grail of knowledge is also there. Such a rich symbolism. Where is Dan Brown when you need him?